I'm standing in the rain outside the house I called home for 32 years, holding a single suitcase and watching the lights flicker on in what used to be my kitchen. The spare key I've carried on my keychain since Marcus was born no longer fits the lock. They changed it. My own son changed the locks on the house where I raised him, where I taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, where I sat up all night when he had pneumonia at age 7. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 12 hours ago, I woke up thinking I was Estelle Franklin, devoted wife and mother. 12 hours ago, I believed my family was the foundation everything else in my life was built upon. Now I'm standing on a sidewalk that feels like the edge of the world, learning that some foundations are made of sand. My name is Estelle Franklin, and today I discovered that the two men I loved most in this world had been planning my exile while I was planning their birthday parties. The morning started like every other Saturday for the past 3 decades. I was awake before sunrise, padding through our colonial house in Salem, Oregon in my terry cloth robe, starting the coffee that would fill our kitchen with the rich aroma Robert had loved since our college days. The newspaper would be waiting on the front porch, still damp with morning dew, and I'd have exactly 45 minutes of peaceful solitude before Robert's alarm clock would send him stumbling downstairs in search of caffeine and conversation. Those morning minutes had always been sacred to me. Time to collect my thoughts, plan the day, and appreciate the life we'd built together in this beautiful house on Maple Street. The kitchen was my favorite room, with its butcher block counters that bore the scars of decades of meal preparation, the bay window that overlooked the garden where I'd grown tomatoes and herbs every summer since 1991, and the breakfast nook where we'd shared countless meals as a family. I was 54 years old and had never questioned whether this routine would continue forever. Robert and I had been married for 32 years, together since we were both 22, and stupid enough to believe that love conquered everything. He was an accountant at Henderson, Willis and Associates, a steady man who brought home steady paychecks and never forgot our anniversary. I worked part-time at the local library, a job that gave me purpose without overwhelming our carefully balanced domestic life. Our son Marcus was 28, married to a lovely girl named Sophia, and living in the converted garage apartment we'd built for them 2 years ago, when they couldn't afford their own place in Salem's increasingly expensive housing market. They were saving for a down payment on their first home, and Robert and I were proud to help them get started in life. Family takes care of family, that's what we'd always believed. The garage apartment had been Robert's idea, actually. He'd spent months drawing up plans, getting permits, and converting the space into a cozy 1-bedroom unit with a kitchenette and full bathroom. Marcus and Sophia could live there rent-free while they saved money, and we could have our son close by during these precious years before grandchildren arrived and their lives became consumed with their own growing family. I loved having them so near. Sophia would often join me for morning coffee, sharing stories about her job at the veterinary clinic where she worked as a technician. Marcus would stop by on his way to work at the construction company, grabbing leftover dinner from the night before and updating us on his latest projects. Sunday dinners were a given, with Sophia helping me prepare meals while Marcus and Robert watched football and argued good-naturedly about the Ducks' chances this season. It felt like the natural evolution of family life. Your children grow up, but they don't have to grow away. We were building something multi-generational, something that would last. That Saturday morning in October, I was humming while I prepared French toast, Marcus's favorite breakfast since childhood. Sophia had mentioned earlier in the week that her parents were coming to visit from Phoenix, and I wanted to make sure we had plenty of food for everyone. Her parents, Linda and George Morrison, were lovely people who'd become like extended family to us over the past 3 years since Marcus and Sophia's wedding. I set the dining room table with my good china, the blue and white pattern that had been a wedding gift from Robert's mother. Fresh flowers from my garden created a centerpiece, and I'd even ironed the cloth napkins that we usually saved for holidays. There was something satisfying about creating beauty in everyday moments, about making ordinary Saturday breakfast feel special. Robert appeared in the kitchen at exactly 7:30, his gray hair still sticking up on one side, despite his attempts to smooth it down. He was a creature of habit, my husband, and I found comfort in his predictability. In a world that seemed to change faster every year, Robert was my constant. "Smells incredible in here," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder while I flipped the French toast. "What's the occasion?" "Sophia's parents arrived today," I reminded him, leaning back into his familiar embrace. "I thought we should make a good impression." "You always make a good impression, Stella," he said, using the nickname he'd given me in college. "They're lucky to have you looking after their daughter." I smiled and turned in his arms to give him a proper good morning kiss. These small moments of affection, accumulated over 3 decades, were what marriage really was. Not the grand gestures or passionate declarations you saw in movies, but the quiet intimacy of 2 people who'd chosen each other every day for 32 years. Marcus emerged from the garage apartment just as I was carrying the platter of French toast to the dining room. He looked handsome in his weekend clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt that brought out the green in his eyes that he'd inherited from his father. At 28, he'd grown into the kind of man I'd always hoped he'd become. Responsible, hardworking, devoted to his wife and family. "Mom, you didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said, but I could see the appreciation in his expression as he took in the carefully set table. "It's no trouble," I replied, the same response I'd given to that comment thousands of times over the years. Taking care of my family had never felt like trouble. It felt like purpose. Sophia joined us minutes later, her dark hair still damp from the shower, wearing a sundress that made her look even younger than her 26 years. She hugged me warmly and complimented the table setting, then helped me bring out the orange juice and coffee while the men discussed Marcus's latest project at work. "My parents should be here around noon," Sophia said as we settled in to eat. "They're really excited to see the apartment and spend some time with everyone." "We're excited to see them too," I said. "How long has it been since their last visit?" "Easter," Marcus answered. "Way too long. You know how Mom feels about family." I did know. Family was everything to me, the center around which my entire world revolved. Robert's parents had passed away years ago, and my own mother lived in a care facility in Portland that I visited every other weekend. But the family we'd created together, Robert and Marcus and now Sophia, felt like my greatest accomplishment. We spent breakfast planning the day. Linda and George would arrive around lunchtime, and we'd all go out to dinner at Sophia's favorite Italian restaurant downtown. Sunday, we'd have our traditional family dinner, maybe take a walk through Bush's Pasture Park if the weather held. It was the kind of weekend I treasured, full of people I loved and the comfortable rhythms of family life. After breakfast, while Robert went to his study to catch up on some work, and Marcus headed back to the apartment to help Sophia prepare for her parents' arrival, I began cleaning the kitchen and planning lunch. I wanted everything to be perfect when the Morrisons arrived. These kinds of details mattered to me, the way a well-prepared meal and a welcoming home could make people feel valued and loved. I was wiping down the counters when I heard voices from the apartment. Not unusual, since sound carried easily between the main house and the converted garage, but something in the tone made me pause. The conversation seemed more intense than casual morning chatter between Marcus and Sophia. I tried not to eavesdrop, but when I stepped outside to water the plants on the back porch, I couldn't help but hear fragments of what sounded like a serious discussion. Words like timing and difficult conversation and has to be today drifted across the yard. A small knot of worry formed in my stomach. Was everything all right with Marcus's job? Had something happened with Sophia's family? I considered walking over to check on them, but decided against it. They were married adults who deserved their privacy, and if they needed help, they knew they could come to me. Instead, I focused on preparing for our guests, making a mental inventory of everything I wanted to accomplish before the Morrisons arrived. Fresh sheets on the guest room bed, a quick vacuum of the living areas, maybe some homemade cookies to go with afternoon coffee. These were the tasks that filled my days and gave them structure. I'd been a homemaker for most of my adult life, a choice that had felt natural and fulfilling when Marcus was young. Even after he'd grown up and moved out, I'd never seriously considered changing course. My part-time job at the library provided intellectual stimulation and social interaction, but home remained my primary domain. Some of my friends had gone back to school or started new careers after their children left home, but I'd felt no desire to dramatically reinvent myself. I was content with who I was. Robert's wife, Marcus's mother, the woman who kept our family running smoothly. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important work, and I took pride in doing it well. By 11 o'clock, the house was spotless, and I'd prepared a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches for when the Morrisons arrived. I was arranging fresh towels in the guest bathroom when I heard Robert calling my name from downstairs. "Stella, could you come down here for a minute?" There was something in his voice that made me hurry, a formality that seemed out of place on a relaxed Saturday morning. I found him in the living room, standing near the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back, looking like he was preparing to deliver a speech. "Is everything okay?" I asked, settling onto the couch and looking up at him expectantly. Robert cleared his throat and avoided meeting my eyes directly. "There's something I need to discuss with you, and I think it's better to have this conversation before Linda and George arrive." The knot of worry in my stomach tightened. "What kind of conversation?" He sat down in his leather armchair, the one that had been his domain for decades, and finally looked at me. The expression on his face was one I'd never seen before, a mixture of determination and something that might have been guilt. "Stella, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about our future, about what I want the next chapter of my life to look like." I nodded encouragingly, though something cold was beginning to creep up my spine. "Okay. We're both in our 50s now," he continued, his voice carefully measured. "Marcus is settled and married. You have your job at the library. We've successfully raised our son and gotten him launched into his own life." "Yes," I said slowly, not understanding where this was leading, but increasingly certain I wasn't going to like the destination. Robert took a deep breath and leaned forward in his chair. "I think it's time for us to consider making some changes. Some significant changes." "What kind of changes?" "I've been offered a position with a firm in Seattle," he said. "Better money, better opportunities. But more than that, I think we need to start thinking about what we want for ourselves, separate from what we've always done as parents." I felt a flutter of excitement, mixed with nervousness. Seattle wasn't that far from Salem, and a new adventure might be exactly what we needed to revitalize our marriage. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "When would we move?" Robert's expression shifted, and the cold feeling in my chest intensified. "That's what I need to discuss with you, Stella. This position, this change, it's something I need to pursue on my own." The words hit me like a physical blow. "On your own?" "I think it's time for us to separate," he said, the words coming out in a rush as if he'd been rehearsing them. "We've grown in different directions over the years, and I think we'd both be happier if we had the space to figure out who we are outside of this marriage." I stared at him, certain I'd misunderstood. "You want a separation?" "I want a divorce, Stella." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself, feeling like the floor might give way at any moment. "A divorce? Robert, where is this coming from? Are you having some kind of midlife crisis?" "This isn't a crisis," he said, his voice frustratingly calm. "This is me being honest about the fact that we haven't been truly happy together in years. We've been going through the motions, living parallel lives in the same house." "We've been happy," I protested, my voice rising. "We had breakfast together this morning. We've been planning this weekend with Linda and George. How can you say we haven't been happy?" Robert shook his head. "Being comfortable isn't the same as being happy, Stella. We've built a nice life together, raised a good son, but the passion is gone. The connection is gone."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"We're more like roommates than husband and wife." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. "So we work on it. We go to counseling. We take a trip together. We don't just throw away 32 years because the passion has faded." "I don't want to work on it," he said, and the finality in his voice made my blood turn to ice. "I want something different. I want to see what my life could look like without the obligations and expectations that have defined it for the past 3 decades." "Obligations?" I whispered. "Is that what I am to you? An obligation?" Robert's face softened slightly. You're a good woman, Stella. You've been a wonderful wife and mother. But I don't want to be married anymore. To anyone. I want to be free to make choices based on what I want, not what's expected of me. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the garden where I'd spent countless hours nurturing vegetables and flowers the same way I'd nurtured our marriage. When did you decide this? How long have you been planning to destroy our family? I'm not destroying anything, Robert said. I'm just being honest about what's not working. What's not working for you? I corrected, turning to face him. Because it's been working fine for me. I've been happy with our life, with our marriage, with our family. Have you really? He asked. Or have you just been comfortable with the routine? The question caught me off guard. Had I been happy, or had I simply been content? The truth was, I hadn't thought to examine the difference. Our life together had felt stable and secure, built on a foundation of shared history and mutual respect. Wasn't that enough? I don't know, I admitted quietly. I thought what we had was enough. It was enough, Robert said. For a long time, it was exactly what we both needed. But people change, Stella. What made us happy at 22 isn't necessarily what will make us happy at 54. I sank back down onto the couch, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. So what happens now? You just leave? We sell the house? We divide up 32 years like it's community property? I've already talked to a lawyer, Robert said, and the fact that he'd taken concrete steps without discussing it with me felt like another betrayal. I think we can handle this amicably. Neither of us wants to hurt the other or make this ugly. Too late for that, I said bitterly. You've already made it ugly by making unilateral decisions about our marriage. Before Robert could respond, there was a knock at the front door. We both froze, staring at each other in the sudden silence that followed. Linda and George weren't supposed to arrive for another hour. I'll get it, I said, grateful for the interruption and the chance to compose myself before facing our guests. But when I opened the front door, it wasn't the Morrisons standing on our porch. It was Marcus and Sophia, both looking serious and uncomfortable. We need to talk, Marcus said without preamble. All of us. I looked from my son's troubled face to my daughter-in-law's anxious expression, then back at Robert, who had appeared in the hallway behind me. What's going on? Can we sit down? Sophia asked gently. This is going to be a difficult conversation. We moved back into the living room, where the echo of Robert's devastating announcement still seemed to hang in the air. Marcus and Sophia sat together on the love seat, across from where Robert and I had been having our marriage-ending discussion just moments before. Mom, Dad, Marcus began, then stopped and took Sophia's hand. There's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to be direct. I felt a familiar maternal instinct to protect him from whatever was causing the distress I could see in his eyes. Whatever it is, sweetheart, we can work through it together. Marcus glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. Linda and George aren't just visiting for the weekend, he said. They're here to help us with something we've been planning for months. Planning what? Robert asked. They've offered to help us buy a house, Sophia said. A really beautiful place in their neighborhood in Phoenix. Linda's brother is a realtor, and he found us something perfect in our price range. I felt a stab of hurt that they'd been house hunting without mentioning it to us. That's wonderful, I said carefully. But I thought you were saving to buy something here in Salem. We were, Marcus said. But this opportunity is too good to pass up. And honestly, Sophia misses being close to her family. I nodded, trying to process this information. It made sense that they'd want to be near Sophia's parents, especially when they started having children. The distance between Oregon and Arizona wasn't insurmountable. We could visit regularly, maybe even spend holidays together. When would you move? I asked. Next month, Sophia said quietly. Next month? The timeline felt sudden, but young couples often moved quickly when opportunity knocked. That's soon, but we'll manage. We'll miss you terribly, but we want what's best for you both. Marcus and Sophia exchanged another look, and I realized there was more to this conversation. There's something else, Marcus said. Linda and George have also offered to help us with the down payment, but there are some conditions. What kind of conditions? Robert asked. Marcus took a deep breath. They'll provide the down payment money, but only if we can show we're financially responsible. That means no debt, no ongoing financial obligations that might interfere with our mortgage payments. I still wasn't understanding why this required such a serious family meeting. That sounds reasonable. The thing is, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper, they consider our living situation here to be a financial dependency that might affect our ability to qualify for the loan. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. You need to move out of the apartment. We need to demonstrate complete financial independence, Marcus said. Linda and George are concerned that living rent-free might indicate we're not ready for the responsibility of homeownership. I felt like I was drowning in revelations, struggling to process both Robert's announcement and now this unexpected development with Marcus and Sophia. So you'll find an apartment in Phoenix before you buy the house? Actually, Marcus said, avoiding my eyes, they want us to move in with them temporarily, just for a few months while we go through the buying process and get settled. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. I see. Mom, Marcus said, finally meeting my gaze, I know this is sudden, but this is our chance to own a home, to build our own life together. Sophia's parents are offering us something we might not get another opportunity for. I looked at my son, this young man I'd raised and loved and supported through every challenge life had thrown at him, and realized he was choosing Sophia's family over ours. Not just moving away, which I could understand and support, but actively rejecting the help and closeness we'd offered in favor of what her parents could provide. When did you decide this? I asked. We've been talking about it for a few months, Sophia admitted. Ever since my parents mentioned the house market in Phoenix and how much further our money would go there. A few months, they'd been planning their exit from our lives for months without saying a word. Just like Robert had been planning his exit from our marriage without consulting me. We wanted to tell you sooner, Marcus said, as if reading my thoughts, but we weren't sure it was going to work out, and we didn't want to get everyone upset over something that might not happen. But it is happening, I said. It is happening, he confirmed. I sat in that living room, surrounded by the 3 people I loved most in the world, and realized they'd all been making plans that didn't include me. Robert wanted a divorce. Marcus and Sophia wanted to move across the country to be with her family instead of ours. I need some air, I said, standing up abruptly and walking toward the front door. Mom, wait, Marcus called after me. We need to finish talking about this. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. What else is there to talk about? The practical stuff, he said. The timeline, the apartment, how we handle the transition. I turned back to look at him. What about the apartment? Marcus and Sophia exchanged another of their meaningful glances. We need to be out by the end of next week, Sophia said. Linda and George want us in Phoenix as soon as possible to start the house hunting process. Next week, I repeated. I know it's fast, Marcus said. But this opportunity won't wait. The house market in Phoenix is really competitive right now. I stared at my son, trying to reconcile this urgent timeline with the careful, thoughtful young man I thought I'd raised. So you're leaving next week, and then what? We see you at Christmas? Maybe Easter? We'll visit, Sophia said quickly. And you can come see us in Phoenix. My parents would love to have you stay with us. The casual assumption that I'd want to be a guest in their life, dependent on their hospitality and Sophia's parents' generosity, felt like salt in an already gaping wound. I need that air, I said, and walked out the front door before anyone could stop me. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of Oregon fall day that usually filled me with contentment and gratitude. I walked down Maple Street, past the houses where we'd been neighbors for 3 decades, past the corner where I'd taught Marcus to ride his bike, past the bus stop where I'd waited with him on his first day of kindergarten. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but the world felt completely different. In the span of 2 hours, my marriage had ended and my son had announced his departure from my life. The family I'd devoted 32 years to building was dissolving, and apparently everyone had seen it coming except me. I found myself at the small park at the end of our street, sitting on the bench where I'd pushed Marcus on the swings when he was a toddler. The park was empty on this Saturday afternoon, just me and the memories of all the times we'd come here as a family. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Come back when you're ready. We need to finish these conversations. I stared at the message, then turned off my phone and put it in my pocket. I wasn't ready to finish anything. I wasn't ready to negotiate the dismantling of my life with the people who'd decided to dismantle it without consulting me. Instead, I sat on that bench and tried to understand how I'd become so completely irrelevant to the people I'd made the center of my world. How had I missed the signs that my husband was unhappy? How had I failed to notice that my son was making life-changing decisions without including me in the conversation? For 32 years, I'd defined myself by my relationships with Robert and Marcus. I was Robert's wife, Marcus's mother, the woman who kept our family running smoothly and happily. But what was I when those relationships ended? What was left of Estelle Franklin when the roles that had defined her entire adult life were stripped away? I didn't know. And for the first time in my life, I was about to find out. I walked back to the house 45 minutes later, my hands numb from the cold, and my mind still reeling from the double blow that had shattered my Saturday morning. The driveway was fuller now. A silver Buick sat next to Robert's sedan, which meant Linda and George Morrison had arrived right on schedule, walking into what had to be the most awkward family gathering in recent memory. Through the living room window, I could see them all gathered around the coffee table. Linda's perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon light as she gestured animatedly, probably sharing stories from their drive up from Phoenix. George sat beside her in his typical weekend uniform of khaki pants and a polo shirt, looking relaxed and happy to be spending time with his daughter and son-in-law. They had no idea they'd walked into the aftermath of two family bombshells. I stood on my own front porch for several minutes, watching this scene of domestic normalcy through the glass, feeling like an outsider looking in on someone else's life. These people had all made decisions about my future without consulting me, and now I was expected to return to the house and pretend everything was normal for the sake of our guests. When I finally opened the front door, the conversation stopped abruptly. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I could see the strain underneath everyone's carefully composed expressions. Linda's smile was a little too bright, George looked confused about the sudden silence, and both Marcus and Sophia appeared to be holding their breath. "Estelle, honey," Linda said, rising from the couch to give me a warm hug. "You look wonderful. How have you been?" "I've been better," I said honestly, because I didn't have the energy to lie anymore. George stood and shook my hand with his usual firm grip. "Great to see you again, Estelle. This is such exciting news about the kids moving to Phoenix. We're thrilled to have them closer to home." I managed a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Yes, it's very exciting." Robert appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee cups, playing the role of gracious host as if he hadn't just announced the end of our marriage an hour earlier. "Linda, George, I was just telling them about that new project at the firm. The one with the medical complex downtown." It was masterful deflection, the kind of conversational pivot that Robert had perfected over 3 decades of social gatherings. Steer towards safe topics, keep the mood light, maintain the facade of normalcy at all costs. I'd watched him do it countless times at dinner parties and family gatherings, but this was the first time I'd seen him use those skills to manipulate our own family situation. I excused myself to freshen up, needing a few minutes alone to process what I'd learned and figure out how to navigate the rest of this surreal day. In the bathroom mirror, I looked pale and shaken, like someone recovering from a fever. My gray-streaked brown hair was mussed from the wind, and there were lines around my eyes that seemed deeper than they'd been that morning. This was the face of a woman whose life had just been upended by the 2 people she trusted most. This was what 54 looked like when everything you'd built your identity around suddenly disappeared. When I returned to the living room, the conversation had moved on to travel plans and logistics. Linda was explaining their timeline for helping Marcus and Sophia get settled in Phoenix, while George discussed the housing market and mortgage rates with the authority of someone who'd been through the process recently with their other children. "The important thing is to move quickly," Linda was saying. "This house Miguel found for them won't stay on the market long, and we want to make sure they have the best possible chance of getting it." I sat down in what had been my usual spot on the couch, next to where Robert was perched on the arm of his leather chair. He gave me a look that I interpreted as a plea for cooperation, a request to keep our personal crisis private until our guests left. Fine, I could do that. I'd been managing family dynamics and keeping everyone comfortable for 32 years. I could manage it for one more afternoon. Tell us about this house, I said, directing the question to Sophia. It sounds like exactly what you've been hoping for. Sophia's face lit up with genuine excitement, and for a moment I forgot my own hurt as I watched her describe their potential new home. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a big backyard for the children they hope to have someday, a neighborhood full of young families just like them. It's in the same school district where I grew up, she added, and only 15 minutes from Mom and Dad's house, so they can help us with babysitting when we're ready to start our family. The casual assumption that Linda and George would be the primary grandparents, the ones who'd provide childcare and be intimately involved in raising the next generation, felt like another small knife wound. I'd been dreaming of grandchildren for years, imagining Sunday dinners with high chairs at our dining room table, teaching little ones to garden in my backyard, passing down family traditions and recipes. But those grandchildren would grow up in Phoenix, 15 minutes from their other grandparents and 8 hours from me. They'd learn Linda's family traditions, not mine. They'd call George's workshop their play space, not Robert's garage, where I'd imagined building toy boxes and dollhouses. That sounds wonderful, I said, because what else could I say? We're so happy for you both. Marcus shot me a grateful look, probably relieved that I wasn't causing a scene or demanding explanations in front of his in-laws. He'd always been sensitive to social dynamics, probably a skill he'd learned from watching his father navigate difficult conversations with smooth charm. The afternoon continued, with the careful choreography of family gatherings where everyone is pretending things are normal. We looked at photos of the Phoenix house on Sophia's phone, discussed travel routes and moving logistics, and made plans for dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant downtown. I played my part perfectly, asking the right questions and making the appropriate responses, all while feeling like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The Estelle who'd woken up that morning would have been genuinely excited about this opportunity for Marcus and Sophia. She would have started planning visits to Phoenix and researching flight schedules. She would have offered to help with packing and organizing the move. But that Estelle had been operating under the assumption that she had a stable marriage and a close relationship with her son. This new version of me, the one who'd learned in the span of 2 hours that both those assumptions were false, didn't know how to respond anymore. During a lull in conversation, while Linda was showing me pictures of their Phoenix neighborhood on her tablet, I heard Marcus and Robert talking quietly near the kitchen doorway. I couldn't make out specific words, but Robert's tone was urgent and Marcus kept glancing in my direction. They were discussing me, probably trying to figure out how to handle the practical implications of Robert's divorce announcement, now that Marcus would be moving out. The house would be too big for one person, especially if I couldn't afford the mortgage payments on my library salary alone. The garage apartment would sit empty, a reminder of the life we'd thought we were building together. Estelle, George said, pulling my attention back to the present moment. Linda was just saying you should come visit us in Phoenix once the kids get settled. We have plenty of room, and you could help Sophia decorate the new house. The offer was kindly meant, but it highlighted everything that was wrong with this new reality. I would be a visitor in my son's life, dependent on his in-laws' hospitality to spend time with my own family. Instead of being the matriarch of our household, I would be a guest who needed to be accommodated and entertained. That's very generous, I said. We'll have to see how things work out. The we slipped out automatically, even though there was no longer a we when it came to Robert and me. These linguistic habits of marriage would take time to break, assuming I ever managed to break them at all. As the afternoon wore on, I began to notice things I'd been too shocked to observe earlier. The way Sophia deferred to her mother's opinions about everything from house hunting to furniture shopping. The way Linda took charge of conversations and made decisions about their timeline and logistics. The way George provided quiet support and practical advice, positioning himself as the reliable father figure who could be counted on for guidance. They were demonstrating the kind of involved, hands-on parenting that Marcus and Sophia clearly valued. They were showing my son what it looked like to have parents who were actively engaged in their adult children's lives, who provided not just emotional support, but concrete help with major life decisions. Had I failed to provide that kind of involvement? Had I been too hands-off, too respectful of their independence, when what they actually wanted was more guidance and assistance. The questions gnawed at me as I watched the easy dynamic between Sophia and her parents. But then I remembered all the times I'd offered help that had been politely declined. The job applications I'd volunteered to review that Marcus said he preferred to handle himself. After dinner, we walked through downtown Salem's historic district, past the shops and galleries that I'd browsed countless times over the years. The October evening was cool but pleasant, and Linda linked arms with Sophia while they window shopped and planned future shopping trips in Phoenix. George and Robert fell into step behind them, discussing business and politics with the easy camaraderie of men who'd known each other for years. Marcus walked beside me, and for the first time all day we had something approaching a private conversation. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know this is a lot of change all at once, but I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you and Dad have done for us. The apartment, the support, all of it. This opportunity doesn't diminish that." I looked at my son, this young man who looked so much like his father had at the same age, and tried to find words for the confusion and hurt I was feeling. "I just wish you'd talk to us about it before making decisions," I said. "This feels very sudden." "It is sudden," he admitted. "But sometimes good opportunities come up fast, and you have to be ready to act. Sophia's parents have been looking out for possibilities for us for months, and when this house came up, they knew it was perfect." "And you didn't think to mention that they were house hunting for you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "We didn't want to get anyone's hopes up until we knew it was real. And honestly, we weren't sure how you and Dad would feel about us moving so far away." "How we'd feel," I repeated. "We want what's best for you, Marcus. We always have." "I know that," he said. "But this move isn't just about the house or the money. Sophia's been homesick ever since we got married. She misses her family, her friends, the life she had in Arizona. This is a chance for her to be happy, and for us to build something close to her support system." The word homesick hit me like a revelation. Sophia had been homesick living near us. Our family, our community, our life in Oregon had never felt like home to her. She'd been politely enduring our proximity while longing for something else entirely. How had I missed that? How had I interpreted her cheerful participation in our family dinners and holiday celebrations when she'd actually been counting the days until she could return to Arizona? "She never said anything," I said. "She didn't want to hurt your feelings," Marcus replied. "You and Dad have been so generous and welcoming. But sometimes being grateful for something doesn't make it feel like home." We walked in silence for a few minutes while I processed this information. Everything I'd interpreted as Sophia embracing our family had actually been her being polite while missing her own. All those mornings when she'd joined me for coffee had been obligation, not genuine desire for my company. The realization was humbling and painful, but also clarifying. I'd been so focused on what I wanted our relationship to be that I'd never asked what she needed it to be. "Will you be happy there?" I asked Marcus finally. "I think so," he said. "Sophia will be happy, which makes me happy. And honestly, Mom, I'm excited about starting fresh somewhere new. Building our own life without feeling like we're still kids being taken care of by our parents." The phrase "still kids being taken care of" stung, even though I understood what he meant. By providing the garage apartment and financial support, Robert and I had inadvertently created a dynamic where Marcus and Sophia felt dependent rather than independent. Our generosity had become a source of frustration rather than gratitude. "I never meant to make you feel like children," I said. "I know you didn't," Marcus replied quickly. "But that's how it felt sometimes, like we weren't really adults as long as we were living in your backyard and accepting your help." When we returned to the house after dinner, Linda and George collected their luggage from their car and settled into the guest room I'd prepared that morning. The evening routine of making sure they had fresh towels and showing them where to find extra blankets felt surreal, given everything that had happened since their arrival. Marcus and Sophia disappeared into the garage apartment, probably to continue packing and planning for their move. Robert retreated to his study, claiming he had work to catch up on, but more likely avoiding any continuation of our earlier conversation. I found myself alone in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher and wiping down counters, in the same automatic way I'd done thousands of times before. These domestic tasks had always been meditative for me, a way to create order and beauty in my immediate environment, even when the larger world felt chaotic. But tonight, each familiar motion felt like an ending. How many more times would I load this dishwasher in this kitchen? How many more Sunday dinners would I prepare for a family that was actively dissolving? How many more times would I arrange fresh flowers from my garden for people who were already planning their escape from my hospitality? I was putting away the last of the dinner plates when Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking concerned. "Estelle, honey, is everything all right? You seemed a little quiet tonight." I considered my options. I could maintain the facade that everything was fine, protect Robert and Marcus from having to explain our family crisis to outsiders. Or I could be honest with this woman who was about to become my son's primary maternal figure. "It's been a difficult day," I said carefully. "A lot of unexpected news all at once." Linda stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind her, creating privacy for what she clearly recognized would be a sensitive conversation. "I hope we're not adding to any stress," she said. "I know our timing probably seems sudden, but we really felt like this house was too good an opportunity to pass up." "No, it's not that," I said, then paused, unsure how much to reveal. "Robert and I are having some personal issues right now. Marriage troubles." Linda's expression shifted to one of genuine sympathy. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Is there anything George and I can do to help?" The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. Here was this woman who barely knew me beyond holiday visits and family gatherings, offering support while my own husband was planning his exit strategy. "I don't think so," I said. "We're probably going to separate. Maybe divorce." Linda's face went pale. "Oh, Estelle, does Marcus know? Robert told him this afternoon, before you arrived." "And this is happening right when the kids are moving?" Linda looked stricken. "The timing is just awful." I nodded, grateful that someone else recognized how overwhelming this convergence of events felt. "I think that's part of why they want to leave quickly. Get settled somewhere stable while everything here is falling apart." Linda was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with how to respond to such devastating news. Finally, she said, "I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in Phoenix. I mean that sincerely. Marcus is going to need his mother, especially during this difficult time." The offer was generous, but it highlighted the fundamental shift that was occurring. I would be welcome in Phoenix as a visitor, as someone to be accommodated and hosted, but not as an integral part of their daily lives. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." "Have you thought about what you'll do?" Linda asked gently. "Will you stay in the house?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't afford it on my own, and it's too big for one person anyway. I suppose I'll have to figure out what my life looks like without a husband, and with my son living across the country." Linda reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think, Estelle. I can tell just from watching you today. This is going to be hard, but you'll get through it." After Linda went to bed, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by 32 years of accumulated life. Wedding photos on the mantle, Marcus's school pictures covering one wall, vacation souvenirs and anniversary gifts, and all the material evidence of what I'd thought was a successful family. Tomorrow, Linda and George would return to Phoenix with Marcus and Sophia to begin house hunting in earnest. Within weeks, the garage apartment would be empty, and Marcus would be living 8 hours away. Robert would start making plans for his move to Seattle and his new single life. And I would be here, in a house too big for one person, trying to figure out who Estelle Franklin was when she wasn't defined by her relationships with other people. The woman who'd woken up that morning had been confident in her role as wife and mother, secure in the knowledge that those relationships provided both purpose and identity. She'd never questioned whether she was happy, because she'd never needed to examine the difference between happiness and contentment. This new version of me, the one sitting alone in her living room at midnight, didn't have the luxury of avoiding those questions anymore. I would have to learn who I was outside of marriage, outside of daily motherhood, outside of all the roles that had given my life structure and meaning. I thought about Linda and George, who'd built a retirement filled with activities and adventures and involvement in their children's lives. They'd prepared for this phase of life, created identities that extended beyond their roles as parents. I'd done none of that preparation. I'd assumed my roles as wife and mother would simply evolve and continue, that I'd transition gradually from active parenting to grandparent involvement without any dramatic changes in between. Instead, I was facing a complete reinvention at 54, with no roadmap and no idea where to begin. The house was quiet around me, but I could hear the faint sounds of conversation from the garage apartment, where Marcus and Sophia were probably making lists and researching moving companies and planning their new life together. Their excitement was palpable even through the walls, and I realized that despite my hurt, I was genuinely happy for them. They were young and in love and building something together. They deserved the chance to create their own family traditions and relationships without feeling obligated to maintain proximity to parents who might not be providing what they needed anyway. The problem wasn't that they were leaving. The problem was that I'd never developed a life independent enough to survive their departure. As I finally headed upstairs to bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me still looked like the Estelle Franklin who'd been married for 32 years and mothering for 28. But behind her familiar features, I could see the beginning of someone new. Someone who was going to have to learn how to be enough for herself. Because for the first time in her adult life, she was all she had. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Oregon weather that matched my internal landscape perfectly. I woke up at 5:30, 2 hours before my alarm, and lay in bed, listening to Robert's steady breathing beside me. He slept peacefully, as if he hadn't detonated our marriage just 24 hours earlier. The normalcy of his presence in our bed felt surreal, like we were actors who'd forgotten to break character after the play ended. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs to start the coffee, needing the familiar ritual to anchor myself in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it after cleaning up from dinner, every surface spotless, every dish in its proper place. The illusion of order and control that I'd maintained for 3 decades. Even as everything underneath was crumbling. Through the bay window, I could see lights on in the garage apartment. Marcus and Sophia were up early too, probably making final preparations for their departure to Phoenix tomorrow morning. Linda and George would drive them to the airport, help them ship their belongings, and usher them into their new life 8 hours away from everything they'd known in Oregon. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and ready for the day despite the early hour. "You're up early," she said, accepting the cup I offered her with a grateful smile. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too much on my mind." Linda nodded sympathetically. "I imagined so. Yesterday was a lot to process." We stood together in comfortable silence, 2 mothers who understood the complexity of loving adult children while learning to let them go. But there was something in Linda's expression that suggested she had more on her mind than casual early morning conversation. "Estelle," she said finally, "there's something I need to tell you. Something that George and I probably should have mentioned yesterday, but we weren't sure how to bring it up given everything else that's happening." My stomach clenched. More revelations, more carefully withheld information that would reshape my understanding of the situation. "What is it?" Linda set down her coffee cup and looked at me directly. "This move to Phoenix isn't just about the house opportunity. Sophia is pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. Pregnant. My daughter-in-law was carrying my first grandchild, and she'd chosen to share that news with her parents before telling Robert and me. The baby I'd been dreaming about for years was already growing, already loved and planned for by people who lived 8 hours away. "How far along?" I managed to ask. "About 10 weeks, Linda said gently. "They just found out for certain last week, which is part of why the timeline for this move became so urgent. Sophia wants to be settled and near family before the baby comes." "Near family. Her family, not ours. Does Marcus know you're telling me this?" Linda shook her head. "They wanted to wait until after the move to make any announcements. But I felt like you deserve to know, especially given what you're going through with Robert." I sank down onto one of the kitchen stools, trying to process this information alongside everything else I'd learned in the past 24 hours. My son was going to be a father, I was going to be a grandmother, and instead of celebrating together as a family, we were all scattered in different directions, keeping secrets and making independent plans. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I know it wasn't your place, but I'm grateful." They're scared, Estelle, Linda continued. This pregnancy wasn't planned. And they're worried about money and stability and being good parents. When we offered to help them get settled in Phoenix, it felt like the answer to their prayers. Of course they were scared. Of course they wanted to be near people who could provide emotional and practical support during such a major life transition. But the fact that they'd turned to Linda and George instead of Robert and me said something painful about how they viewed our ability to help them through this challenge. Will you tell Robert? Linda asked. I think Marcus should tell his father himself, I said. But yes, Robert needs to know. After Linda went back upstairs to wake George, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring out at the garage apartment, and trying to reconcile this new information with everything I thought I understood about my family. Marcus and Sophia were going to have a baby. They'd known for a week and hadn't told us. Instead, they'd confided in her parents, made plans with her parents, accepted help from her parents. We'd been relegated to the role of secondary family members, people who would learn about major developments after decisions had already been made. The resentment I felt was immediate and ugly, followed quickly by shame. This should be a moment of pure joy. My son was going to be a father. I was going to be a grandmother. But instead of celebrating, I was drowning in hurt feelings and wounded pride. I thought about all the conversations Marcus and I had shared over the years about his future family. How he'd always said he wanted to be the kind of father who was present and involved, unlike some of his friends' dads who'd been distant and preoccupied with work. How he'd talked about wanting his children to grow up knowing their grandparents, having the kind of extended family support he'd enjoyed as a child. Had those conversations been meaningless? Had he been saying what he thought I wanted to hear while privately planning a different kind of future? Or had something changed more recently, some shift in our relationship that had made him turn to Sophia's parents instead of us when they needed guidance and support? I was still sitting at the kitchen counter when Robert appeared, looking haggard and older than his 56 years. The stress of yesterday's revelations had etched new lines around his eyes, and his usually precise morning routine seemed scattered and uncertain. Coffee? I offered, though my tone was probably colder than necessary. Please, he said, settling onto the stool across from me with the careful movements of someone nursing a hangover, though I knew he'd only had 2 glasses of wine with dinner. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unfinished conversations hanging between us. Finally, Robert cleared his throat and attempted to bridge the gap. About yesterday, he began. I know the timing was terrible. I never intended for the divorce conversation to happen at the same time as Marcus's announcement. But you did intend for it to happen, I said. The timing was just inconvenient. Robert nodded reluctantly. I've been thinking about this for months, Stella. It wasn't a sudden decision. Months, I repeated. You've been planning to end our marriage for months, and you never said a word to me. I didn't know how to bring it up, he said. Every time I tried to start the conversation, it felt wrong. Too harsh, too sudden. So instead, you just decided unilaterally that our marriage was over and made plans accordingly. I hoped I might change my mind, Robert admitted. I kept thinking maybe the feelings would come back, maybe I'd remember why I wanted to be married in the first place. The admission was devastating in its honesty. Robert had been conducting an internal evaluation of our marriage for months, weighing its value against his desire for freedom, and I'd been completely unaware that I was being judged. And you've decided they won't come back, I said. The feelings. I don't think so, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Stella, I really am. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life going through the motions of being married when my heart isn't in it anymore. Before I could respond, Marcus emerged from the garage apartment and knocked on the kitchen door. He looked nervous and determined, like someone preparing to have a difficult conversation. Mom, Dad, he said as I let him in. Can we talk? All of us? Robert and I exchanged glances, both probably wondering how much more family drama we could handle before 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Of course, I said. Do you want coffee? No, thanks. I just need to tell you both something, and I should have done it yesterday. Marcus sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years, where we'd helped him with homework and celebrated good report cards, and had countless family conversations. "Sophia is pregnant," he said without preamble. "We found out last week, and we're both excited and terrified." Robert's face went through a series of expressions, surprise giving way to confusion, and then settling into something that might have been joy. "Congratulations," he said, though his tone was more subdued than I would have expected for such momentous news. "That's wonderful." "It is wonderful," Marcus said. "But it's also why this move to Phoenix became so urgent. Sophia wants to be near her mom during the pregnancy, and we want the baby to grow up close to at least one set of grandparents." At least one set? The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. They were choosing Linda and George to be the involved grandparents, the ones who would babysit and attend school plays and create memories with the next generation. Robert and I would be the distant relatives who sent cards and gifts and visited occasionally. "How far along is she?" Robert asked. 10 weeks. The baby's due in May." I did quick math in my head. May was 7 months away. 7 months to watch my son and daughter-in-law build their new life in Arizona, while my marriage dissolved and my role as primary grandmother evaporated. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "We wanted to be sure everything was okay with the pregnancy first, and honestly, we weren't sure how to break the news about the move and the baby at the same time." "So you told Sophia's parents first," Robert said. "It wasn't a question." "They were going to find out anyway because of the house hunting," Marcus said defensively. "And Sophia needed someone to talk to about the pregnancy symptoms and what to expect." Someone to talk to. Not me, the woman who'd carried and delivered him, who'd read every pregnancy book available when I was expecting, and had been looking forward to sharing that experience with my daughter-in-law. Sophia had needed someone to talk to, and she'd chosen her mother over me. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "It's a lot to process." "There's something else," Marcus said, his discomfort increasing visibly. "Something I need to say about the living situation here." Robert and I waited, both probably bracing for another revelation. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "even before the pregnancy, Sophia and I had been talking about moving out of the apartment. Not necessarily leaving Oregon, but finding our own place." "Why?" Robert asked. "Is there something wrong with the apartment?" "No. The apartment is great. You guys have been incredibly generous, but we felt like we were stuck in a weird limbo. Not quite independent adults, but not really kids living at home either." I thought about our conversation the night before, when Marcus had said essentially the same thing, but hearing it again, in the context of the pregnancy announcement and everything else that was happening, felt like another rejection of the life Robert and I had tried to build for our family. "We should have been honest about that months ago," Marcus continued. "But we didn't want to seem ungrateful, and we weren't sure we could afford anything else in Salem. So when Sophia's parents offered to help you buy a house in Phoenix," I said, "it solved multiple problems at once." "Exactly. And with the baby coming, being near Sophia's family just makes sense. Her mom can help with childcare, her dad can teach me about home maintenance, we'll have a built-in support system." Support system. As if Robert and I weren't capable of providing support, weren't interested in being involved grandparents, weren't worthy of consideration when it came to major life decisions. "What about us?" I asked quietly. "What about your father and me being involved in your child's life?" Marcus looked genuinely pained. "You'll be involved, Mom. We'll visit. You can come to Phoenix. We'll make sure the baby knows both sets of grandparents." But it wouldn't be the same, and we all knew it. The grandparents who lived 15 minutes away would be the ones who formed daily relationships with the child. We would be the ones who required planning and coordination and formal visits. "When do you leave?" Robert asked. "Tomorrow morning. Linda and George are driving us to the airport, and we'll spend a few weeks house hunting before we ship our stuff." Tomorrow. They were leaving tomorrow, and this was the first Robert and I were hearing about the timeline. "That's very soon," I said. "I know, but the house market moves fast, and we want to be settled before Sophia starts showing. Before she starts showing. Before the pregnancy becomes visible and real to everyone around them. They wanted to be in their new life, with their chosen family, before their child became an obvious presence in the world." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. 3 generations of our family sat around the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, and nobody seemed to know what to say next. Finally, Robert spoke. "Well, this certainly changes things." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean the divorce, the house, all of it. If you're moving to Arizona and starting a family, your mother and I need to figure out what our lives look like independently." I stared at Robert, realizing he was using our son's departure as justification for his own exit strategy. As if Marcus moving away made our marriage less worth preserving, rather than more important to maintain as a stable foundation for our grandchild's extended family. "You're still getting divorced?" Marcus asked, looking stricken. "That was always the plan," Robert said. "This doesn't change anything between your mother and me, but it changed everything about the timing and the implications. Instead of 2 stable homes that Marcus could bring his family to visit, there would be chaos and upheaval and divided loyalties. Instead of united grandparents who could provide a consistent presence in their child's life, there would be complicated logistics and competing schedules." "Maybe you should wait," Marcus said, "until after the baby comes, until we're all settled in our new situations." "No," Robert said firmly. "Waiting won't change how we feel about each other. It will just postpone the inevitable." I looked at my husband, this man who'd shared my bed for 32 years and fathered my child, and realized he'd already moved on emotionally. The divorce wasn't something he was considering. It was something he'd already committed to, regardless of what else was happening in our family. "I need some air," I said, standing up abruptly. "Mom," Marcus started, but I was already heading for the back door. I walked out into my garden, letting the light rain soak through my pajamas and robe. The tomato plants I'd tended all summer were brown and withered, finished for the season. The flower beds were full of dead heads and dying annuals that would need to be cleared before winter. Everything around me was ending, transitioning into dormancy or death. The garden that had given me so much satisfaction over the years now looked like a metaphor for the rest of my life. I heard the kitchen door open behind me, and Marcus's footsteps on the wet deck. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I know this is all happening at once, and it's not fair to you." "Life isn't fair," I said, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. "But I always thought family was supposed to cushion the unfairness, not add to it." "We're not trying to hurt you," Marcus said. "We're just trying to build the best life we can for our family. And apparently that life doesn't include us," I said, turning to face him. "Not in any meaningful way." Marcus looked young and uncertain, caught between loyalty to his wife and concern for his mother. "It's not that we don't want you involved. It's just that geography matters when you're raising kids. Daily presence matters. And you've decided that Sophia's parents deserve that daily presence more than we do. We've decided that Sophia needs her mother right now," Marcus said. "She's scared about the pregnancy, worried about being a good mom, and she wants her support system close by." Her support system. Not our family's support system, but Sophia's specifically. I was finally understanding the fundamental shift that had occurred. This wasn't about Marcus choosing between 2 sets of parents. It was about Sophia needing her parents, and Marcus following that need wherever it led. "I understand," I said, and for the first time I actually did. "You're being a good husband by prioritizing what your wife needs." Marcus looked relieved that I wasn't going to fight him on this. "I am, but that doesn't mean I love you and Dad any less." "I know that too," I said. "But love doesn't always translate into proximity or involvement. Sometimes love means letting people go where they need to be." We stood together in my dying garden while the rain continued to fall, both of us processing the reality of how much distance would soon separate us. In 24 hours, Marcus would be on a plane to Arizona, beginning a new chapter of his life that would unfold hundreds of miles away from everything familiar. "Will you be okay?" he asked finally. "With the divorce and everything?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'll figure it out." "Maybe this could be good for you too," Marcus said tentatively. "A chance to figure out what you want your life to look like without being responsible for everyone else." The suggestion stung, even though it echoed thoughts I'd been having myself. Had I been too focused on taking care of everyone else? Had I neglected to develop interests and goals that were purely my own? Maybe, I said. It's hard to imagine right now. You're stronger than you think, Mom. You've always been the one who held everything together. But that was exactly the problem. I'd been so focused on holding everyone else together that I'd never learned to stand on my own. Now at 54, I was about to find out who Estelle Franklin was, when she wasn't defined by her relationships with other people. When we went back inside, Linda and George were in the kitchen with Robert, sharing coffee and what looked like an uncomfortable conversation. They all looked up when Marcus and I entered, clearly waiting to see how our private talk had gone. "Everything okay?" George asked kindly. "We're working through it," I said, which seemed like the most diplomatic response. "We want you to know," Linda said, "that we hope this transition will bring our families closer together, not drive them apart. Marcus and Sophia's baby will have 4 grandparents who love them, even if we're scattered across different states." It was a generous sentiment, and I could see that Linda meant it sincerely. But I also knew that geography and daily involvement would create natural hierarchies in the child's life. The grandparents who live nearby would be the ones who mattered most. "Of course," I said. "We all want what's best for the baby." The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of packing and preparations and awkward conversations about logistics. Marcus and Sophia loaded their car with everything they'd need for their house hunting trip, while Linda and George coordinated travel arrangements and discussed timeline expectations. Robert disappeared into his study for most of the afternoon, claiming he needed to work but probably just avoiding the emotional complexity of watching our son prepare to leave. I found myself moving through the house like a ghost, straightening things that didn't need straightening and organizing spaces that were already organized. By evening, the garage apartment stood empty except for the furniture that would be donated or sold. Marcus and Sophia had packed their personal belongings, their wedding photos, the items that would help them create a sense of home in their new Arizona house. We ordered pizza for dinner, a casual choice that felt strange given the magnitude of what was happening. But nobody seemed to have the energy for cooking or formal meal planning. We sat around the kitchen table, eating off paper plates, and making small talk about travel routes and weather forecasts. It felt like the last meal of a family that was about to scatter in 4 different directions. Marcus and Sophia to Arizona. Robert to his new single life in Seattle. Me to whatever came next for a woman whose primary roles had just been eliminated. "We should get to bed early," Linda said around 8 o'clock. "The flight leaves at 10:30, and we want to get to the airport with plenty of time." There was a flurry of final preparations and last-minute packing checks. Sophia hugged me tightly before heading to the apartment for their final night in Oregon. "Thank you for everything, Estelle," she said. "You've been so welcoming and generous. I hope you know how much that's meant to us." "Take care of yourself," I said, "and take care of my grandbaby." Her face lit up at my acknowledgement of the pregnancy. "We will. And we'll send lots of pictures." Marcus lingered after Sophia went outside, clearly struggling with how to say goodbye to the life he'd known for 28 years. "This isn't goodbye forever," he said. "We'll visit. You can come to Phoenix. The baby will know you." "I know," I said, hugging my son for what might be the last time in his childhood home. "Go build your life, sweetheart. Be happy." After everyone went to their respective beds, I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by 32 years of accumulated memories. Wedding photos, baby pictures, family vacation souvenirs, all the material evidence of what I'd thought was a permanent life. Tomorrow, Marcus would be gone. Next week, Robert would start making concrete plans for his move to Seattle and his new job. Within a month, I would be alone in this house, trying to figure out how to start over at 54. The silence felt different than it ever had before. Not peaceful, but heavy with loss and uncertainty. This was what the end of one life looked like before the beginning of another. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, passing the guest room where Linda and George slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps about the grandchild they would help raise and the young couple they were guiding toward a new beginning. In my own bedroom, Robert was already asleep, turned away from my side of the bed. Tomorrow night, he would probably sleep better than he had in months, relieved to have finally set in motion the changes he'd been contemplating for so long. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain that had been falling all day. Somewhere in Phoenix, there was a house waiting for my son and daughter-in-law, a place where they would create new memories and raise my grandchild far from everything I'd known. And somewhere in my own future, there was a life waiting for me to discover it. A life I would have to build from scratch, without the roles and relationships that had defined me for over 3 decades. The woman who'd woken up yesterday morning would have found that prospect terrifying. But this new version of me, the one who'd been stripped of her illusions and forced to confront hard truths about love and family and independence, felt something unexpected. Not excitement exactly, but a grim determination to find out who she really was when all the external definitions were stripped away. Tomorrow would be the first day of whatever came next, and for the first time in years I had no idea what that might look like. But I was going to find out. The silence in the house that Monday morning was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not the comfortable quiet of early mornings when family members were still sleeping, but the hollow emptiness of a space that had been fundamentally altered. I woke up at 5:30 to the sound of nothing, no movement from the garage apartment, no familiar sounds of Marcus and Sophia starting their day. They were gone. At 10:30 the previous morning, I'd watched their plane taxi down the runway at Portland International Airport, carrying my son toward a new life that would unfold 8 hours away from everything I'd known. Linda and George had returned to Salem to collect their belongings before driving back to Phoenix, leaving Robert and me alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous. I made coffee for one person, a simple adjustment that somehow felt monumental. For 28 years, I'd automatically prepared enough coffee for whoever might wander into the kitchen. Now it was just me, sitting at a table set for one, reading a newspaper that contained no news about my family's future. Robert had left early for the office, claiming he needed to catch up on work after the weekend's disruptions. But I suspected he was avoiding the awkwardness of navigating our new reality as a couple heading toward divorce. The polite distance we'd maintained for our guests had given way to something colder and more permanent. I called in sick to the library, something I rarely did, but the thought of explaining my absence over the weekend to concerned colleagues felt overwhelming. Instead, I spent the morning walking through our house, really seeing it for the first time in years. The colonial-style home on Maple Street had been our pride and joy when we'd bought it in 1991. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a large kitchen perfect for entertaining, and enough yard space for Marcus to play safely while I gardened. We'd chosen it specifically because it felt like a forever home, a place where we could raise our family and eventually welcome grandchildren. Now it felt like a mausoleum of someone else's life. The family room where Marcus had played with Legos for hours. The dining room where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners for extended family. The master bedroom where Robert and I had whispered about our dreams for the future while Marcus slept down the hall. Every room told the story of who we used to be, but offered no clues about who I might become. I found myself in Marcus's old bedroom, which we'd converted into a guest room after he'd moved into the garage apartment. The walls still held faint marks where his posters had been taped, shadows of a childhood that felt both recent and ancient. I sat on the bed where I'd read him bedtime stories and checked for monsters under the furniture, trying to reconcile that devoted mother with the woman I was becoming. The phone rang around noon, jarring me out of my reverie. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, and my heart leaped with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to sound more composed than I felt. "Hey, Mom, we made it safely." The flight was smooth, and Sophia's feeling better now that we're on the ground. "That's good. How's the house hunting going?" "We're meeting with the realtor this afternoon to see 3 properties. Linda thinks we might be able to make an offer by the end of the week if we find the right place." By the end of the week, everything was moving so quickly, as if Marcus and Sophia were afraid that delaying their new life might somehow derail it entirely. "That's exciting," I said, because it was what he needed to hear, even if excitement wasn't what I was feeling. "Mom, I want you to know that this doesn't change how I feel about you and Dad. You're still my parents, and this baby is still your grandchild." "I know that, Marcus." "Do you?" "Because I've been worried that you think we're abandoning you, and that's not what this is about." I considered my response carefully. Marcus was reaching out, trying to bridge the distance that geography and circumstances were creating between us. The least I could do was meet him halfway. "I think you're doing what you need to do for your family," I said finally. "That's what good husbands and fathers do." I heard him release a breath he'd been holding. "Thank you for understanding. I know it's not easy." No, it's not easy. But difficult things are often the right things. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, flight schedules, and moving timelines, and when they might have a permanent address. Normal conversation that felt anything but normal, given the enormity of the changes happening in all our lives. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and forced myself to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. Marcus was right to worry that I felt abandoned, because that's exactly how I felt. But he was wrong about who had abandoned me. Robert had abandoned our marriage months ago, conducting a private evaluation of our relationship without including me in the process. Marcus had chosen to build his life around Sophia's needs and her family's support, which was admirable but left no meaningful role for me. But the person who had most thoroughly abandoned me was myself. For 32 years, I'd constructed my identity entirely around other people's needs and expectations. I'd been Robert's wife, Marcus's mother, the woman who maintained the household and managed the social calendar and kept everyone else's life running smoothly, but I'd never developed a clear sense of who Estelle Franklin was outside those roles. Now at 54, I was about to find out. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I drove to downtown Salem and enrolled in a ceramics class at the community college. Not because I had any particular talent for pottery, but because I'd always been curious about working with clay and had never made time to explore that curiosity. The instructor was a woman named Patricia, who looked to be in her 60s, with paint-stained fingers and the kind of confidence that comes from spending years perfecting a craft. She showed me around the studio, explaining the different types of clay and glazes, the process of throwing pots on the wheel, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional with your own hands. "Have you ever worked with clay before?" she asked. "No, but I think I'd like to learn." Good attitude. Clay is forgiving, but it teaches you patience. You can't rush the process. I signed up for the beginner's course that started the following week, paying for 6 weeks of classes with money from my own checking account. It felt like a small act of rebellion, spending money on something purely for my own enjoyment rather than for household needs or family obligations. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store and found myself in the frozen dinner aisle, looking at meals designed for one person. For 32 years, I'd planned dinners around Robert's preferences and Marcus's schedule, cooking elaborate meals that brought us together around the table. Now I was contemplating whether I wanted the chicken Alfredo or the beef and broccoli for tonight's solitary dinner. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This was what independence looked like at the most basic level. Choosing your own meals, setting your own schedule, answering only to yourself. I bought the chicken Alfredo and a bottle of wine that I would drink without worrying about whether anyone else enjoyed it. Robert came home around 7 o'clock, looking tired and distracted. He reheated leftover Chinese food from the weekend while I ate my frozen dinner, both of us making polite conversation about our respective days. "How's Marcus settling in?" he asked. "They're house hunting. Might make an offer by the end of the week." Robert nodded, processing this information with the same detached interest he might show in a colleague's vacation plans. "That's good. Best to get settled quickly." "Robert," I said, setting down my fork, "we need to talk about practical things. The house, finances, how we're going to handle this transition." He looked uncomfortable but nodded. "You're right. I've been putting off those conversations. I can't afford this house on my library salary," I said bluntly, "and it's too big for one person anyway." "I know. I've been thinking about that too." "What have you been thinking?" Robert chose his words carefully. "I think we should sell it, split the proceeds according to whatever the lawyer recommends. Then we can both start fresh somewhere smaller." Start fresh, as if 32 years of marriage could be dissolved and divided like community property, with each party walking away to begin again. "Where would you go?" I asked. "Seattle, probably. The job offer includes relocation assistance, and the cost of living isn't too different from Salem." "Seattle. Close enough to visit Marcus occasionally, but far enough to establish a completely independent life. I wondered if Robert had already been apartment hunting online, planning his escape route while I'd been focused on holding our family together. "What about you?" he asked. "Any thoughts about where you'd like to live?" The question caught me off guard. For the first time in my adult life, I could live anywhere I wanted without considering anyone else's needs or preferences. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't gotten that far yet." "Well, we don't need to decide everything immediately. The legal process will take a few months anyway. A few months to dismantle a life we'd spent 3 decades building." It seemed like simultaneously too much time and not nearly enough. That night I lay in bed listening to Robert's breathing and trying to imagine what my bedroom would look like in some unknown future home. Would I keep the same furniture, the same bedding, the same photographs on the nightstand? Or would I start completely over, choosing items that reflected who I was rather than who we'd been together? The thought of shopping for a bed, of selecting sheets and pillows and decorative items based purely on my own preferences, felt both exciting and lonely. I'd been half of a couple for so long that I wasn't sure I remembered how to be a whole person on my own. Tuesday morning brought an email that changed everything. Patricia, the ceramics instructor, had forwarded a message from someone named Helen Watanabe, a gallery owner in Portland who was looking for part-time help with administrative work and customer service. "Thought you might be interested," Patricia had written. "Helen mentioned she'd prefer someone with library experience, and you have that calm, organized energy she's looking for." I stared at the email for several minutes, considering the implications. Portland was 2 hours north of Salem, a real city with museums and cultural opportunities, and a completely different energy from the small-town life I'd known. It would mean leaving everything familiar, starting over in a place where nobody knew me as Robert's wife or Marcus's mother. It would mean becoming just Estelle Franklin, whoever that turned out to be. On impulse, I called the number Patricia had provided and arranged to meet Helen Watanabe that Thursday. The gallery was located in Portland's Pearl District, surrounded by art studios and trendy restaurants, and the kind of urban sophistication I'd always admired from a distance. Helen was a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and the kind of understated style that spoke of confidence and self-possession. Her gallery specialized in contemporary ceramics and sculpture, work by artists who pushed the boundaries of traditional craft into fine art territory. "Patricia says you're starting to work with clay," Helen said as she showed me around the space. "I am. Very much a beginner." "Good. Beginners see things differently. They ask questions that experienced people take for granted." The gallery was beautiful, with clean white walls and carefully positioned lighting that made each piece look like a precious object worthy of serious consideration. I could imagine spending my days here, talking to visitors about the artists and their techniques, helping people discover work that spoke to them. "The position is part-time to start," Helen explained. 20 hours a week, flexible schedule. "I need someone who can handle the administrative work and interact professionally with customers and artists." "What made you think of hiring someone from outside the art world?" Helen smiled. "Experience has taught me that passion can be learned, but people skills and organizational ability can't. Patricia said you've spent years managing complex family dynamics and keeping multiple schedules coordinated. Those are exactly the skills I need. Family dynamics and schedule coordination. Was that really what my 32 years of marriage and motherhood had been? It seemed like such a reduction of what I'd thought was a rich and meaningful life. But Helen was right that those skills were transferable. I had managed complex relationships and competing priorities. I had juggled schedules and mediated conflicts and kept track of countless details that made other people's lives run smoothly. Maybe it was time to use those abilities for something beyond domestic management. "I'm interested," I said. "But I should mention that I'm going through a divorce and will probably be relocating within the next few months." "From where?" "Salem. My husband and I are selling our house." "Perfect," Helen said without hesitation. "I was hoping to find someone who might be available for full-time work eventually. Portland's a great city for starting over." Starting over. There was that phrase again, but this time it didn't sound like a loss. It sounded like a possibility. I accepted Helen's offer that afternoon, agreeing to start the following Monday. The drive back to Salem felt different, like I was returning to a life that was already becoming part of my past rather than my present. When I told Robert about the job over dinner, he looked surprised but pleased. "Portland's a good choice," he said. "Close enough to visit Marcus occasionally, but far enough to build your own life." That's what I was thinking. Are you nervous about living alone? It was a thoughtful question, one that acknowledged the magnitude of the transition I was facing. Terrified, I said honestly, but also excited. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "You're going to be fine, Stella. Better than fine. You're going to discover parts of yourself you never knew existed." The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Instead of two people trapped in a marriage that wasn't working, we were becoming two individuals who'd shared a significant portion of their lives, and now wished each other well in whatever came next. That weekend, I drove to Portland and looked at apartments. The real estate agent, an energetic woman named Carol, showed me several options in different neighborhoods. But the moment I walked into a one-bedroom unit in the Pearl District, I knew I'd found my new home. The apartment was on the third floor of a converted warehouse, with exposed brick walls and large windows that overlooked the city. It was sophisticated and urban, and completely different from anywhere I'd ever lived. The kitchen was small but efficient, designed for someone who cooked for pleasure rather than obligation. The bedroom felt like a peaceful retreat, and the living room had space for bookshelves and comfortable seating, and maybe even an easel if I decided to try painting. "It's perfect," I told Carol, signing the lease that afternoon. On the drive back to Salem, I called Marcus to share my news. "Portland?" he said, sounding surprised. "That's a big change, Mom." "It is, but I think it's the right change. What kind of work will you be doing?" I described the gallery and Helen's offer to train me in arts administration. Marcus listened with what sounded like genuine interest and growing admiration. "That sounds amazing," he said finally. "I had no idea you were interested in art." "Neither did I, really. But I'm learning that I'm interested in a lot of things I never had time to explore." "I'm proud of you, Mom. It takes courage to start over like this." His approval meant more to me than I'd expected. For so many years, I'd measured my success by my family's happiness and stability. Now I was learning to value my own growth and independence, and having Marcus's support in that journey felt like a gift. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations and transitions. Robert and I worked with a realtor to list the house, dividing our possessions with surprising civility. Items that had once seemed essential to our shared life revealed themselves to be either obviously his or obviously mine, with relatively few disputes over who would take what. I kept the dining room table where we'd shared so many family meals, but left behind the bedroom furniture that felt too connected to our marriage. I packed books and garden tools and the few pieces of art we'd collected over the years, but left the wedding china and crystal that had never felt particularly meaningful to me anyway. Marcus called regularly during this period, checking on my progress and sharing updates about his own new life. He and Sophia had found their perfect house, a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood full of young families. The baby was doing well, and Sophia's morning sickness was finally subsiding. "We want you to visit once we're settled," he said during one of our conversations. "Maybe at Christmas so you can see the house and spend time with us." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. The prospect of visiting Marcus in his new life no longer felt like a painful reminder of loss, but like an opportunity to see the young man he was becoming as a husband and father. Robert's departure for Seattle happened gradually and without drama. He took a few pieces of furniture and his personal belongings, leaving behind most of the items that had defined our shared domestic life. On his last night in the house, we shared a bottle of wine and talked about our years together with something approaching fondness. "We had a good run," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "We did," I agreed. "We raised a wonderful son and had some beautiful years together." "No regrets?" I considered the question seriously. "No regrets about what we built together. Maybe some regrets about not recognizing sooner when it was time to let each other go." "Fair enough," Robert said. "Here's to new chapters." To new chapters. We hugged goodbye the next morning with genuine affection, two people who'd shared the most important years of their lives and were now brave enough to face the future separately. The house sold within 2 weeks of being listed, to a young couple expecting their first child. I felt a sense of completion watching them walk through the rooms where Marcus had grown up, imagining their own family traditions taking root in spaces that had nurtured mine. My last night in the house, I sat in the empty living room with a cup of tea, surrounded by boxes labeled for my new Portland apartment. The silence felt different than it had in those first days after Marcus left. Instead of emptiness, it felt like potential. At 54, I was about to start the first chapter of my life that belonged entirely to me. I had a job that excited me, an apartment that reflected my own taste, and the freedom to discover who Estelle Franklin was when she wasn't defined by her relationships with other people. The ceramic classes had taught me that clay could be shaped and reshaped until it found its final form, then fired into something permanently beautiful and strong. I was beginning to understand that people could go through a similar process, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, sent from Phoenix, where he was probably getting ready for bed. "Thinking of you tonight, Mom. Excited for your new adventure?" I typed back, "Excited too. Love you." And for the first time in months, excited was exactly what I felt. Not sad about what I was leaving behind, but genuinely eager to discover what came next. I locked the door of my family home for the last time and drove north toward Portland, toward my new apartment, and my new job, and my new life. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house where I'd been Robert's wife and Marcus's mother for 32 years. But in front of me was a city full of possibilities, a life I would build according to my own vision and values. At 54, I was finally ready to find out who I really was. The woman driving toward Portland that November morning was stronger than the one who'd stood in the rain outside her own home just a few months earlier. She'd learned that family love could survive geographic distance, that marriage could end without destroying the good years that had come before it, and that starting over wasn't a failure but a form of courage. She'd also learned that clay could be shaped into something beautiful, that galleries could become second homes, and that independence was a skill that could be developed at any age. Most importantly, she'd learned that Estelle Franklin was enough, all by herself, to build a life worth living. 6 months later, I stood in Helen's gallery during the opening reception for my first curated exhibition, watching visitors discover the work of emerging ceramic artists I'd helped select. Marcus and Sophia had flown in from Phoenix for the event, and Marcus was clearly proud as he watched me navigate conversations with collectors and critics. "You look happy, Mom," he said during a quiet moment between guests. "I am happy," I said, realizing it was completely true. Happier than I've been in years. Sophia, now visibly pregnant and glowing with health, squeezed my hand. "The baby's going to be so lucky to have such a strong grandmother." A grandmother who lived in Portland, who managed art exhibitions and took pottery classes and had learned to cook elaborate meals for one person. A grandmother who visited Phoenix regularly, but also had her own rich life to return to. A grandmother who could model independence and resilience and the possibility of reinvention at any stage of life. That evening, after the reception ended and Marcus and Sophia had returned to their hotel, I walked back to my apartment through the Pearl District's quiet streets. My living room was filled with flowers from the gallery opening, and my shelves held books about art and ceramics and Portland's cultural scene. On my kitchen counter sat a framed photo from Marcus and Sophia's baby shower in Phoenix, where I'd been welcomed warmly by Linda and George and treated as an honored grandmother-to-be. In the picture, I was holding a tiny outfit meant for my granddaughter, due to arrive in just 2 months. I would fly to Phoenix for the birth, stay for a week to help with the adjustment, then return to my own life while remaining connected to theirs. It was a different kind of family relationship than what I'd originally envisioned, but it was authentic and sustainable and built on choice rather than obligation. My phone rang as I was getting ready for bed. Robert's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine pleasure. "How did the exhibition go?" he asked. "Beautifully. Marcus and Sophia came in for it, and Marcus seemed really proud." "I'm sure he was. You've built something impressive, Stella." "Thank you. How are things in Seattle?" "Good. Really good. I'm dating someone, actually. A woman I met through the hiking club." I felt a moment of surprise, followed immediately by happiness for him. "That's wonderful, Robert. I'm glad you found someone who shares your interests. What about you? Anyone special in your life?" I considered the question. There was David, the sculptor whose work I'd featured in the exhibition, who'd asked me to coffee several times. There was James, Helen's accountant, who'd made it clear he'd like to take me to dinner. There were possibilities, but no urgency. Not yet, I said, but I'm open to it. Good. You deserve to be happy. After we hung up, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the city lights of Portland, thinking about the woman I'd become over the past year. She was still Marcus's mother, and would soon be a grandmother, but those roles no longer defined her entirely. She was also a gallery administrator, a ceramics student, a Portland resident, a woman who'd learned to live alone without being lonely. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult days when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I'd questioned whether I was strong enough to build a life entirely from scratch. There had been moments of grief for the family structure I'd lost, and uncertainty about whether I was making the right choices. But there had also been mornings when I'd woken up excited about the day ahead, evenings when I'd felt proud of what I'd accomplished, and countless small moments when I'd realized I was becoming someone I actually liked. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning in May, 8 pounds and 6 ounces of perfect health and beauty. I held my granddaughter for the first time in a Phoenix hospital room, surrounded by both sets of grandparents and 2 exhausted but ecstatic new parents. "She's beautiful," I whispered to Marcus as I cradled his daughter. "She looks like you," he said. Same chin, same stubborn expression. I laughed, studying the tiny face that would grow into someone I'd love fiercely but from a distance. This little girl would grow up knowing she had 4 grandparents who adored her, even if some lived farther away than others. "What's her name?" I asked. "Eleanor," Sophia said from the hospital bed. "Eleanor Grace. We're going to call her Ellie." Eleanor Grace. A strong name for what I could already tell would be a strong little girl. I stayed in Phoenix for a week, helping with laundry and meal preparation, and holding the baby while Marcus and Sophia caught precious hours of sleep. Linda and I worked together easily, 2 grandmothers united in our desire to support the new parents without overwhelming them. When it was time to return to Portland, the goodbye was emotional but not devastating. I would see Ellie again in 2 months. When Marcus and Sophia brought her to Portland for a visit, I would return to Phoenix for her first Christmas. We would maintain the connection across the miles through video calls and photographs, and carefully planned visits. Most importantly, Ellie would grow up seeing that women could love their families deeply, while also maintaining independent, fulfilling lives. She would learn that love didn't require sacrifice of identity, that strength could coexist with tenderness, that it was possible to be devoted to family while still being devoted to yourself. On the plane back to Portland, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating weekend when my marriage ended and my son announced his departure. The woman who'd felt her world collapse was now someone who'd built a new world entirely from scratch. I'd learned that resilience wasn't about avoiding change but about embracing it, that family connections could survive geographic distance and role redefinition, that love, real love, wanted what was best for people, even when that meant letting them go where they needed to be. The plane descended toward Portland as the sun was setting over the mountains, and I looked down at the city that had become my home. Tomorrow I would return to the gallery, where Helen was planning an exhibition of contemporary sculpture that I would help organize. This weekend I would attend my ceramics class, where I was finally learning to center clay on the wheel with something approaching confidence. Next month I would have dinner with David, the sculptor who'd been patiently asking me out for weeks. I was finally ready to consider what romance might look like for a woman who'd learned to be complete on her own. Estelle Franklin at 55 was a different person than she'd been at 54, shaped by loss and challenge into something stronger and more authentic. She discovered that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be, that independence was a skill that improved with practice, and that the love of family could evolve and adapt to new circumstances without diminishing. As I collected my luggage and headed toward the taxi that would take me home to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete confidence in my ability to handle whatever came next. I'd been tested by circumstances I'd never imagined facing, and I'd not only survived but thrived. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was finally brave enough to explore. And for the first time in my adult life, that future belonged entirely to me. 2 years after Eleanor's birth, I received a phone call that would test everything I'd learned about resilience and family dynamics. It was Marcus, calling from Phoenix on a Wednesday evening while I was reviewing applications for the gallery's summer internship program. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice carrying the weight of serious news. "Sophia's been offered a job opportunity that would mean relocating again." I set down the stack of resumes I'd been reading and gave him my full attention. "What kind of opportunity?" "A veterinary practice in Denver is looking for a senior technician to help them expand into exotic animal care. It's exactly the specialization Sophia's been wanting to pursue, and the salary is significantly higher than what she's making here." Denver. That was only a 6-hour drive from Portland, compared to the 8-hour journey to Phoenix. Geographically, it would bring them closer to me, but I had learned not to measure family relationships purely by miles. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. "Conflicted," Marcus admitted. "The opportunity is incredible for Sophia's career, and we'd be able to afford a bigger house with a real yard for Ellie. But it means leaving the support system we've built here with Linda and George." I understood the complexity of his situation better than he probably realized. Moving to Denver would mean giving up the daily grandparent involvement that had been such a crucial factor in their decision to settle in Phoenix. Linda and George had become integral parts of Eleanor's daily life, babysitting while Marcus and Sophia worked, attending every milestone, providing the kind of hands-on support that made working parenthood manageable. "What does Sophia think?" "She's excited about the professional opportunity but worried about leaving her parents. And honestly, we're both concerned about how Linda and George will handle it. They've become so attached to Ellie." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, Marcus and Sophia had chosen proximity to Linda and George over proximity to Robert and me. Now they were facing the possibility of reversing that choice, not out of preference for my company, but because of career advancement and financial considerations. "Have you discussed it with them yet?" "We're telling them this weekend. But I wanted to talk to you first, maybe get your perspective on how to handle the conversation." I smiled at the request. Marcus was asking for my advice on navigating difficult family dynamics, recognizing the experience I'd gained through my own challenging transitions. It felt like a form of respect I'd never expected to receive from my adult son. "Be honest about your reasoning," I said. "Focus on what this opportunity means for your family's future, not on what you'll be leaving behind. And give them time to process the news before expecting a response." "That makes sense. Mom, if we do make this move, would you be interested in being more involved in Ellie's life? I know it's been hard only seeing her a few times a year." The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't want more involvement, but because I'd worked so hard to build a life that didn't depend on proximity to my family for fulfillment. The woman who'd been devastated by Marcus's original move to Phoenix might have jumped at this opportunity without considering the implications. But the woman I'd become needed to think more carefully about what increased involvement would mean for the life I'd created in Portland. "I'd love to see more of Ellie," I said carefully, "but I want you to make this decision based on what's best for your family, not on guilt about my feelings or obligations to give me more access to my granddaughter." "It's not about guilt," Marcus said quickly. "It's about wanting our daughter to really know her grandmother, not just see her occasionally for visits." That evening, I walked through the Pearl District thinking about family patterns and geographic proximity, and the ways relationships evolve over time. The Marcus who'd moved to Phoenix at 28 had been focused on establishing independence from his parents' influence. This version of him, a 31-year-old father with career responsibilities and a toddler, was thinking about providing his daughter with the kind of extended family support he'd once taken for granted. I thought about Linda and George, who'd structured their retirement around being hands-on grandparents. This potential move would force them to confront the same kind of loss and adjustment I'd faced 3 years earlier. The difference was that they were in their 70s, with less time and energy to reinvent themselves around new circumstances. 3 days later, Marcus called with an update on their family meeting. "It didn't go well," he said, sounding exhausted. "George was supportive, said he wanted whatever was best for our family. But Linda got really upset. She started talking about how we were abandoning them after everything they'd done for us." I winced, recognizing the emotional manipulation even as I understood Linda's pain. "How did you respond?" I tried to stay calm and focus on the practical benefits of the move. But Sophia ended up crying, and Ellie picked up on the tension and got fussy. The whole thing was a disaster. "Give it time," I advised. Linda's reaction came from fear of losing her daily connection with you and Ellie. Once she processes the initial shock, she might be more willing to discuss how to maintain your relationship from a distance. I hope so. But right now she's acting like we're betraying the family by even considering the move. Over the next few weeks, I found myself in the unexpected position of serving as an informal counselor for both sides of the family conflict. Marcus called regularly to vent his frustrations with Linda's emotional pressure tactics. Sophia reached out via text to ask for advice on managing family guilt while pursuing career goals. Most surprisingly, Linda herself called me one evening, clearly struggling with the situation. "Estelle, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she began. "But I don't know who else to talk to about this. You went through something similar when Marcus first moved to Phoenix." "I did," I said. "It's one of the hardest things a parent faces." "How did you handle it? The fear that you'd become irrelevant in your child's life?" Her vulnerability was touching, and I found myself wanting to help her navigate this transition, despite our somewhat complicated history. "I had to learn that relevance isn't about proximity," I said. "It's about the quality of the relationship you maintain regardless of distance. And I had to accept that supporting Marcus sometimes meant letting him go where he needed to be, even when that was painful for me." "But Ellie is so young," Linda said. "If they move now, she won't remember how close we were during her early years. She might not remember the specific details, but she'll carry the love you've given her. And if you handle this transition gracefully, you'll model for her how family relationships can adapt to changing circumstances." We talked for over an hour, two grandmothers sharing the complex emotions of loving a family that was outgrowing the roles we'd carved out for ourselves. By the end of the conversation, Linda sounded calmer and more accepting of the possibility that Marcus and Sophia might choose to leave Phoenix. A month later, Marcus called with their final decision. They'd accepted the Denver opportunity and would be moving in the late summer, giving themselves time to find a house and arrange Eleanor's transition to a new daycare. "How are Linda and George handling it?" I asked. "Better than expected, actually. Linda had a long conversation with someone that helped her put things in perspective. She's still sad about losing our daily presence, but she's stopped trying to make us feel guilty about the decision." I smiled, pleased that my conversation with Linda had helped facilitate a healthier family dynamic. It felt like a full-circle moment, using the wisdom I'd gained from my own difficult transition to help others navigate theirs. "What about the practical arrangements? Have you looked at houses in Denver?" "We have. There's a neighborhood called Highlands that seems perfect. Good schools, family-friendly, about 20 minutes from Sophia's new job. And Mom, it's only about 4 hours from Portland by car. 4 hours. Close enough for weekend visits, for spontaneous trips to see Eleanor's school plays or birthday parties. Close enough for me to be a regular presence in her life without rearranging my entire existence around proximity to my family." "That sounds wonderful," I said, and meant it. The months leading up to their move gave me time to consider what increased involvement in Eleanor's life might look like. I'd built a satisfying career at the gallery, developed meaningful friendships in Portland, and created a lifestyle that reflected my own interests and values. I didn't want to return to the kind of family-centered existence I'd had during my marriage, but I was excited about the possibility of being a more present grandmother. I decided to approach it the same way I'd approached everything else in my post-divorce life. Thoughtfully, with clear boundaries, and in a way that enhanced rather than replaced my independent identity. Helen was supportive when I explained the situation and asked about adjusting my work schedule to allow for more frequent trips to Denver. "Family flexibility is one of the benefits of working for a small organization," she said. "As long as you can manage your responsibilities here, I don't see any problem with you traveling more often." I also began planning how I could use my new proximity to Eleanor to share parts of my Portland life with her. The Children's Museum, the Saturday Market, the pottery studio where I'd been taking classes for 3 years. I wanted her to see me in my own environment, not just as a visiting grandmother, but as a woman with her own interests and activities. David, the sculptor I'd been dating casually for the past year, was equally supportive of my family plans. "It's one of the things I admire about you," he said over dinner one evening, "the way you've learned to balance independence with family connections. A lot of people struggle with that. We'd been taking our relationship slowly, both of us learning how to navigate romance after significant life changes. David had gone through his own difficult divorce 5 years earlier and understood the importance of maintaining individual identity within a romantic partnership. Will this change things between us? I asked. If I'm traveling to Denver more frequently? Only if you want it to, he said. I'm not going anywhere, Estelle. Whatever pace feels right for you feels right for me. Marcus, Sophia, and Eleanor moved to Denver on a hot August day, with Linda and George driving the moving truck while I flew in to help with the transition. The house they'd chosen was a charming 2-story colonial, in a neighborhood full of mature trees and sidewalks, perfect for stroller walks. Eleanor, now a chattering 2-year-old with her father's green eyes and an independent streak that reminded me of myself, adapted to the move with the resilience of early childhood. She explored her new backyard with delight, claimed the bedroom with yellow walls as her own, and seemed oblivious to the adult anxieties about family geography that had dominated the past few months. Linda and George stayed for a week, helping to organize the house and establish routines. I watched Linda work hard to maintain her composure as she faced the reality of leaving Eleanor behind, and I felt deep respect for her efforts to support Marcus and Sophia's decision, despite her own grief. On their last evening in Denver, Linda and I took a walk around the neighborhood, while Marcus and George assembled Eleanor's new playground set. Thank you, she said as we paused at a small park where Eleanor would probably play in the years to come. For what? For the conversation we had months ago. For helping me understand that loving Eleanor means wanting what's best for her family, even when that's hard for me. You didn't need my help to reach that conclusion, I said. You just needed time to work through your feelings. Maybe. But it helped to talk to someone who'd been through something similar. Someone who'd learned how to let go gracefully. We stood together watching children play on swings and slides. 2 grandmothers who'd learned that family love could survive major transitions if people were willing to adapt and prioritize relationships over geography. After Linda and George returned to Phoenix, I settled into a routine of visiting Denver every few weeks. Sometimes I came for long weekends, helping with Eleanor while Marcus and Sophia adjusted to their new jobs and social environment. Other times I came for special occasions, Eleanor's birthday parties or holiday celebrations, or just because I missed her chatter and curiosity. The dynamic felt completely different from my old role as full-time wife and mother. I was involved in Eleanor's life by choice rather than obligation, present when I could contribute meaningfully, and absent when my own responsibilities in Portland required attention. It was the kind of balanced relationship I'd never imagined possible during those early days of learning to live alone. Eleanor and I developed our own traditions during these visits. Saturday morning trips to the Denver Art Museum, where she would make confident pronouncements about which painting she liked and why. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood, during which she would collect interesting leaves and rocks for elaborate art projects. Bedtime stories that often turned into conversations about colors and shapes and the difference between Portland and Denver and Phoenix. Grandma Estelle lives far away but visits lots, she announced one evening as I was reading her a book about families. That's right, I said. Grandma Linda and Grandpa George live very far away but love you very much even though they can't visit as often. And you love me even when you're in Portland? I love you all the time, no matter where I am. She nodded seriously, apparently satisfied with this explanation of how love could exist across distance. At 2 years old, she was already learning lessons about family relationships that had taken me decades to understand. 1 year after the move to Denver, Marcus called with news that shifted our family dynamic once again. Sophia's pregnant, he said, joy evident in his voice. We're going to have another baby. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely thrilled. How's Eleanor taking the news? She's excited about being a big sister, though I'm not sure she fully understands what that means yet. The baby's due next spring. A second grandchild. Another opportunity to be involved from the beginning, to help establish traditions and relationships that could grow over time. But also another reminder that my role in their lives would always be supporting rather than central, important but not essential. Will Linda and George be moving to Denver for the birth? I asked. They're planning to come for a few weeks when the baby arrives. And, actually, Mom, we were hoping you might consider the same thing. Eleanor's going to need extra attention during the transition, and it would mean a lot to have both grandmothers here to help. The request felt like recognition of my value as a family member, an acknowledgement that my support was wanted rather than merely tolerated. It was also an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of collaborative grandparenting that could serve our family well in the years to come. I'd be honored to help, I said. That spring, I took a month-long leave of absence from the gallery to be in Denver for the birth of my second grandchild. Samuel Marcus, 8 pounds of perfect health, and his father's serious expression, arrived on a Tuesday morning after a relatively easy labor. Linda and George arrived 2 days later, and for 3 weeks our extended family worked together to support Marcus and Sophia during the challenging early days of life with 2 children under 3. Linda and I shared cooking and cleaning responsibilities, while George helped Marcus install car seats and baby-proof the house for their newly mobile toddler. Eleanor, initially fascinated by her baby brother, quickly grew bored with his lack of interactive capabilities and began demanding extra attention from whatever adult was available. I spent hours reading her stories, building block towers, and taking her on neighborhood walks that allowed her parents to focus on feeding and sleeping schedules. The experience taught me that effective grandparenting was less about competing for primacy in grandchildren's affections and more about providing consistent support for their parents' well-being. Linda and I worked together seamlessly, 2 women united in our desire to help Marcus and Sophia navigate this major transition successfully. When it was time for both sets of grandparents to return to our respective homes, the goodbye felt sad but not devastating. We'd established a foundation for collaborative family support that could function across whatever distances separated us. Back in Portland, I threw myself into gallery work with renewed energy. Helen had been promoted to curator at a larger institution, and I'd been offered the opportunity to take over management of our gallery. The prospect of running my own exhibition space felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "You're ready for this," Helen assured me during our transition meetings. "You've developed excellent instincts for identifying emerging artists, and you have the administrative skills to manage the business side effectively." The promotion meant longer hours and greater responsibility, but also the freedom to shape the gallery's direction according to my own vision. I began planning exhibitions that reflected my growing interest in the intersection between traditional crafts and contemporary art, featuring artists who pushed boundaries while honoring historical techniques. David and I had been dating for 2 years by this point, and our relationship had evolved into something comfortable and sustaining without becoming consuming. He understood my commitment to both career and family, and I appreciated his own dedication to his art and his grown children who lived in other cities. "Have you thought about moving in together?" he asked one evening as we prepared dinner in my apartment. "I have," I said honestly, "but I'm not sure I'm ready to share space again. I've gotten used to having my own environment. What if we kept both places but spent more nights together? I'd like to wake up next to you more often, but I understand the need for independence." It was exactly the kind of compromise that reflected how much I'd learned about balancing intimacy with autonomy. We began spending 4 or 5 nights a week together while maintaining our separate homes, creating a relationship structure that worked for both of us. My life at 57 was rich and complex in ways I'd never imagined during those early months of learning to live alone. I had meaningful work that challenged and fulfilled me. I had a romantic relationship that enhanced rather than consumed my identity. I had friendships with other women who'd navigated their own major life transitions and understood the importance of maintaining individual interests alongside family connections. Most importantly, I had a relationship with my family that was based on choice and mutual respect, rather than obligation and proximity. I visited Denver every month or 2, sometimes for special occasions and sometimes just because I missed Eleanor's questions and Samuel's baby smiles. Marcus and Sophia brought the children to Portland twice a year, sharing my city and my life with the next generation. Linda and I had developed an unexpected friendship through our shared grandparent status, comparing notes on child development and coordinating gifts to avoid duplication. George and I bonded over our mutual interest in woodworking, and he'd begun making furniture pieces for the gallery's special exhibitions. Even Robert and I maintained cordial contact, sharing updates about the grandchildren, and occasionally meeting for coffee when his business travel brought him to Portland. He'd married his hiking companion the previous year, and I'd been genuinely happy to send a congratulatory card. The family structure we'd created was unconventional but functional, based on love and respect rather than traditional roles and expectations. It had taken years of adjustment and several major relocations, but we'd found a way to maintain connections across distance, while allowing everyone the freedom to pursue their own goals and interests. On Eleanor's 4th birthday, I sat in Marcus and Sophia's backyard, watching her blow out candles surrounded by new friends from Denver, long-distance family members connected by video call, and the 2 sets of grandparents who'd learned to love her collaboratively rather than competitively. "Happy birthday, sweet girl," I whispered as she made her wish. Later, as I helped clean up party decorations, Marcus pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Mom, I want you to know how proud I am of who you've become," he said. "The way you handled our move to Phoenix, the independence you've built, the career you've created. Eleanor's going to grow up with an incredible role model." "Thank you," I said, touched by his recognition of my journey. "It wasn't always easy, but I'm glad I learned to build a life that works for me." "Do you ever regret not fighting harder to keep us in Oregon? Not demanding more involvement in our decisions?" I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "Fighting would have damaged our relationship without changing the outcome. Learning to support your choices even when they were difficult for me created the foundation for the relationship we have now." That evening, as I flew back to Portland, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed in the 6 years since that devastating weekend, when everything I'd thought was permanent suddenly changed. The woman who'd felt abandoned and irrelevant had become someone whose advice was sought, whose presence was valued, whose independence was respected. I'd learned that resilience wasn't about avoiding change, but about adapting to it gracefully. That family connections could survive geographic distance and role redefinition. That love, real love, wanted what was best for people even when that meant letting them find their own path. Most importantly, I'd discovered that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be, that starting over wasn't a failure but a form of courage, and that the most important relationship you could build was the one with yourself. As the plane descended toward Portland, I looked forward to returning to my gallery, my pottery classes, my dinner dates with David, and all the other elements of the life I'd created from scratch. Tomorrow, I would continue building something that was entirely my own, while remaining connected to the family I loved across whatever distances separated us. Estelle Franklin at 57 was a different woman than she'd been at 54, shaped by loss and challenge into something stronger, more flexible, and more authentically herself. She'd proven that love could evolve and adapt to new circumstances, that family didn't require proximity to remain meaningful, and that independence was a skill that improved with practice. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities she was finally brave enough to explore. And for the first time in her adult life, that future belonged entirely to her, while still leaving room for everyone she loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.